I absolutely love your theme for this convention. It was an invitation that I could not refuse after hearing the theme, because this is my life mantra these days. Getting messy, getting our hands dirty, true incarnational ministry, missional ministry. The church has left the building in my life. And I will just tell you this is a sacred invitation for me. But I just met the ladies at Sojourn House just before I came in. And I feel like I should say this. I hope that everything that the Lord has prepared me to say today will prepare you to support this vital work that's right here on your district. I had no earthly idea that they were here, and I thought, here we are, just 3 hours down the road, I'm going to get all these folks to come help RestStop. Well, I'm glad that I can right now affirm Sojourn House, and I look forward to hearing about them and learning more. I want to begin with a Franciscan blessing, if you will allow me. I love the Franciscan order. St. Francis, Pope Francis, they are Christians both of action and contemplation, faith and deeds. Have you read James 2:14 through 26 lately? I love James 2:22. Said of our father Abraham, you see that his faith and his actions were working together. And his faith was made complete by what he did. And Paul said it another way in Galatians 5:6. He said, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. Wow, that's powerful. And so let me start with this blessing. May God bless you with discomfort. Discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. And may God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice and freedom and peace. And may God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and to turn their pain to joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in the world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done, to bring justice and kindness to all our children and to the poor in all the ways that they are poor. If I've learned one thing in my 59 years, it is that God's call is dynamic, not static, never static. That's why in the Old Testament, his light moved with the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, and the people were to move with it, move when he moves. That's why Jesus' first words to his disciples were, follow me. It means move when he moves and where he goes. Come and see, he said. Come and see. So, nothing gets truly dynamic in my life of discipleship until it first gets very specific. I was 38 years old, and at the top of my game, professionally, I had an earned doctorate. I was head of my department at Tvpa Nazarene University, had a thriving consulting business. I was also a deeply committed Christian who had really been immersed in Bible study more so than ever over the last 7 years before this age of 38, because between the age of 28 and 31, I lost my sister and my best friend, who were way too young to leave this earth, and God did a number on me. And so now I found myself wrestling with a new surprise call of God to leave everything behind that I'd worked so hard to gain. God was claiming his gifts for his church in a new way, in vocational ministry that I'd never dreamed about. He was calling me to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. He was calling me to pastor, and I was resisting. I was wrestling. But you know what? They don't call it a wrestling hold for nothing. Wrestling is a very intimate place to be, especially when you're wrestling with the Lord and you're going to say to him, I will not let you go until you bless me. And I was wrestling. And I went to the Gallup organization. Their headquarters at that point in time was in Lincoln, Nebraska, at the invitation of Don Clifton, who was the chairman of Gallup at the time and the brains behind the Strengths Finder, if any of you know that instrument. And he was a friend and mentor to me, and he knew that I was wrestling and struggling about my life and my calling, and he invited me to come to their executive leadership development seminar. He scholarshiped me to come. It's an expensive thing to do. And he assigned me a wonderful former pastor as my personal coach. And we had spent one morning, early morning, behind closed doors for a couple of hours, just going over my whole life, my strengths, my gifts, my talents, kind of the thing that they do, and really helping me try to see where all this was going. And we walked out of that office, Kurt Lievsfeld and I, and if you know anything about the Gallup organization, their headquarters is always a very busy place because they're constantly looking at the Gallup poll numbers. And so it was arranged in one of those atrium style, several floors, where each floor above could look over and see what was going on below. And in every corner of that rectangle were giant jumbotrons, the largest TVs you've ever seen, because they wanted that Gallup poll to be constantly running and all their employees to be able to see that. And so we walked out of that office and there was eerie silence. And we looked up at the jumbotron, and this next slide will show you what was on the screen. The plane was about to fly into the second building because the date was 9/11. 2001, and I instantly fell to my knees, as were other people, just weeping and crying all around this business headquarters building as we looked. And I instantly heard the voice of my sweet shepherd, and he said, see why I need you? My people are perishing. The world's gone mad. I need you. Get out there and get messy, get dirty, and be a deliverer of sorts for my people. That was kind of how the call came. And wow, I got to fast forward to 10 years later. 10 years later, it was June 2011. I was now an ordained elder in the Church of the Nazarene. I had done the thing. I had been serving my local congregation in Hermitage for 10 years at that point, and I was the community life pastor. And I had been leading our small groups through a book by David Platt called Radical. Don't know if you know it, but the subtitle of that book is Taking Back Your Faith from the American Dream. And here's something that's said about that book. The message of that book. It's easy for American Christians to forget how Jesus said his followers would actually live, what their new lifestyle would actually look like. They would, he said, leave behind security, money, convenience, even family for him. They would abandon everything for the gospel. They would take up their cross daily. And Platt challenges us in this book to consider with an open heart how we have manipulated the gospel to fit our cultural preferences. He shows what Jesus actually said about being his disciple. And then he invites us to believe and live, obey what we have heard. I believe that book was prophetic way back then, prophetic in my life, that moved me into an arena that I believe is more relevant now than ever before. And so a divine discontent began being stirred in my heart. Before that, I was perfectly content in my church pastoral role. But wow, the stirring of the Holy Spirit began. And so I knew something was up. I knew God was up to something in my life, and I had served for 10 years, and I was gifted a summer sabbatical to go and finish this wrestling job, wrestle it to the mat, and see what the next 10 years of ministry were supposed to be like. And so I scheduled a silent retreat up at the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. I don't know if you've ever been there. Wonderful monastery. A place to go to seek the face of the Lord in silence and solitude and to hear from him, to hear that prophecy, Branda, so that then I could go and live it. And while there, a brief time, the monks just kept saying, have you been to the statues? Have you been to see the statues? Have you visited the statues? I had no earthly idea what they were talking about. But early the next morning, I pretty much had a wake-up call from the Lord. He said, get your backpack, get your Bible, get your camera, get your water, we're going on a journey. And the monks pointed the way, and down the road, outside the safe confines of the monastery, I had to actually go through the big heavy gate and go outside the safety of the monastery. Down the road was that little sign you just saw that was just pointing into the woods. I mean, we're in the middle of Nowheresville in Kentucky. I'm on this road. It's very early in the morning. I mean, almost before light. And I'm a woman, and I'm alone, and I'm looking at a sign that just points into the woods that says, to the statues. And Jesus said, yep. And I reached in my pocket, and I pulled out a little card that I had picked up at the monastery. And it had this prayer written on it by Thomas Merton. And I read it just as I'm going to read it to you right before following that sign that was pointing into the deep, dark woods. And everything your mama ever taught you is just going through your head saying, not a good idea. And here's the prayer. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean I'm actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope that I have that desire in all that I'm doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust you always. Though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. And so with that word and that confidence, off we went, just me, myself, and the Lord, down the path. And he begins to just shine the light on a little piece of the path at the time. And step by step, we began to make our way. And This little journey has become a metaphor for my life, really. The next slide will show you, sometimes it's a steeper incline, and we need that help of that railing to get us where we're supposed to go. And then sometimes you run into the bridge to nowhere, the scary, shaky bridge across the deep chasm, and it's like, am I really going to go across that? I'm all alone. But yes, you do. And then he shows you another signpost that says you're still on the right path. You're on the way. And sometimes he leads you into the green meadows, and sometimes it's beside the still waters. And then sometimes it's this crazy stairway to where? But you keep following because his light is moving, and he says move, and it's dynamic. And then my path took me across this little brook, and though you don't see the placard, there was a placard there that called it the Kedron Brook. And I thought, Kedron, that has a ring of familiarity to it. And then right around the corner was not a grove of olive trees, but a grove of mimosa trees. And I started sensing where we were, and then I ran smack dab into the sleeping disciples. And my heart was immediately pricked. And it was that response that we will have when we know we've been serving the Lord with all we've had, but he's about to bring new revelation. But I said, not I. Is it I, Lord? No, I can't be asleep at the wheel. I've been serving you since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. What? But I was asleep in some areas. I was not wide awake the way he wanted me to be awake. And so after a few sacred moments there of trying to accept the fact that maybe I was a sleeping disciple, I looked, and about a stone's throw away, you could see it barely, I began to see the outline of the statue of the agonizing Christ. Yeah, we were in the middle of the Garden of Gethsemane. What a place to wrestle, right? The next slide will get a little closer. Light was beginning to shine, and the next slide, I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, but right underneath the arms, there were dewdrops. It was so early, and the dew was still there, and it made me think about the sweat drops of blood as the agonizing Christ agonized over his Father's will. And the intensity of that moment was a little overwhelming to me. And I heard Jesus clearly say, sit down. We got some work to do. And if you'll look at the next slide, I had not noticed when I first came up, there was a little Adirondack chair sitting right there in front of this statue of the agonizing Jesus. And that's when all the things he had told me to bring, it's like, take out your Bible. We got work to do. And he literally took me to every scripture that I think I had been resisting my entire life. I didn't know I'd been resisting it. I'd resist it at a deeper level that he wanted to show me. All the scriptures about the last and the least and the lost, and the scriptures, all the scriptures about oppression and his desire to lift oppression, and scriptures about justice, and just even the golden rule came alive to me in a new way. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. In the same way that you love yourself. Love your neighbor with that same level of intensity. Pray for them in the same way that you pray for you and your needs. And it just came alive in a whole new way. And then I heard the key question that he brought me there to ask me. And he said very clearly, if she is not free, then why are you free? Do you think I love her any less than I love you? And the she that I knew he meant in a particular person and all the people that she would represent was the very first survivor of sex trafficking that I had met face to face. I had done a lot of reading, heard a lot of stories. It had been pricking my heart, the issue of human trafficking, and particularly sex trafficking, because I cannot imagine a worse fate for myself as a woman or as a child, a girl. And it had already been breaking my heart, but I met this first survivor. Her name was Kay, and I remembered when I first looked into her eyes, it was so evident. Though the physical chains were gone, the physical bondage was gone, there was no freedom in her psyche, in her spirit, in her eyes, in her mind, in her soul, her heart, her emotions, and hers is one of the most horrific stories I'd ever heard. Really, at the tender young age of 5, her own father began grooming her for the family business. It was organized crime. He was a high-ranking law enforcement official in their small town, and he literally took her all over the world, sold her to the highest bidder. All over the world, traveled in conditions you wouldn't want your dog to travel in. She saw things and experienced things no human being should ever experience, much less a young girl. And the really crazy thing was, this young woman had found her way to Trafficking Nazarene University. She was in her early 30s by this point, but she was there. And that came way too close to home for me. And it was immediate. Not on my watch. Not on my watch. Something has to be done. And so, right there in that chair, in that Garden of Gethsemane, and you can turn to the next slide, RestStop Ministries was born. It was labored over. I'm thinking about my granddaughter, who was just born after 48 hours of labor, 4 hours of pushing, and then a C-section. Labor is a very hard thing, and after laboring with the Lord, he birthed RestStop Ministries ex nihilo, out of nothing. And he even named it. I mean, he was so specific. He gave me the name. He said, rest, restore these precious survivors. Give them rest in me. Stop this horrific criminal oppression. It has to end. It has to stop in your lifetime. Rest, stop. You will not rest. You will not stop until this is done. Be a safe sanctuary, a rest stop on their long, arduous journey where they can stop a while and rest and find deep healing that they will need. And so he designed it all. It really was his blueprint. And we went back to Nashville from that day and began working toward what he had told us to do. And it took 4 years of, I told these gals, it's the hardest work you'll ever do. Getting there, and then once you're there, it even gets harder when you open the doors of your residential program. But in the fall of 2015, we opened our doors to Tennessee's first long-term residential restoration program. And they can come and live with us free of charge, completely free of charge to them for up to 2 full years. And we take care of their every need, house them, clothe them, feed them. They come to us in horrible shape, body, mind, soul, and spirit. And so all of their medical, dental, vision, all of their mental health therapy, their prescription drugs, their legal case and legal needs, their family reunification and reconciliation issues, their, you name it, we provide it. Their education gaps, their job skills training and readiness, their transportation needs to and from all the places they need to go. We're doing everything that it takes to fully rehabilitate them and allow them to be able to re-enter society and reimagine their lives. Reimagine their lives. For some of them, it's it's not even, they've never had a chance from childhood to even, it's not reclaiming a life that was stolen for them from some, they never had the life God intended from the beginning. And that's what we were called to do. And we simply tell these women, you come and do the hard work of healing. And it's so hard that the women we serve have what we call the big trifecta of the complex trauma, which you think about a trauma that occurs once and how difficult that is to get over, but a trauma that occurs over and over and over and over again, complex trauma. Many of them have addiction issues because either that's what got them vulnerable in the first place, or that's their trafficker used it to control them, or that's what they used to cope after the fact. But addiction issues, mental health issues, a minimum of PTSD, but we see everything on the spectrum. So it's hard work to heal, but we say you just come and do the hard work of healing, and we'll take care of your every need. And one of the things that we have to do to complete the cycle, if these women cannot become economically independent and be economically empowered by the end of this rehabilitation process, then the chances of the cycle of victimization continuing is very, very high. And so we've always had good employer partners to help them find work, but we've had social enterprise on our strategic plan from the beginning because we knew if we could have our own way for them to earn a wage within a trauma-informed environment, because for so many of them, that's when they relapse, is when they leave the safety of us and they go back out into the world, and they get so triggered. And so we thought if we could give them a little more time and they can work within a trauma-informed environment. So we were waiting for the right opportunity for God to land in our laps. And again, we've been doing this work now for 6.5 years, and it was just this past fall that finally the opportunity came. And so there's a brief 2 or 3 minute video. It was actually a newscast that was done in Nashville to kind of highlight our social enterprise. So I will let you see that before I continue.
We are facing a crisis here in Tennessee, sex trafficking. About 95 kids and countless adults are trafficked every month in the volunteer state.
Sickening to hear it, but nonprofits like RestStop Ministries in Lebanon take in as many women as they can to help them heal. And as News Channel 5's Claire Kopsky learned, they're now giving those survivors a chance to have a job while they recover with the help of fried green tomatoes.
6 years ago, Rondy Smith opened the doors to RestStop Ministries.
Restore survivors, stop oppression. The particular oppression that we want to stop is the criminal oppression of sex trafficking.
The nonprofit runs a long-term residential restoration program for trafficked women in Lebanon.
The pandemic has increased the exploitation because of the isolation that it created. Our referrals are going up, and we're almost a full house.
Amid higher referrals, the nonprofit became a social enterprise, a goal from the start.
The economic empowerment of our survivors is so critical. What we knew is that if we could have a social enterprise where we could control a trauma-informed environment for them to work in, that they could work sooner and begin to earn sooner.
They found a partner in local business owner Holly Cooper and her daughter Kayla.
Fried green tomatoes. We sell a lot of fried green tomatoes.
As seen on Shark Tank, the pair run a food truck and distribution of, you guessed it, fried green tomatoes. Knowing they needed to add staff to grow their business, hiring women at RestStop seemed to be a perfect pairing.
I was in active addiction for about 10 years. I don't think people understand the gravity, how hard it is to get a job when you've been in jail. You have no social security card, you have no ID, and you have no driver's license. And so it's like, where do you start?
The duo's heart for women needing a fresh start led to jobs packaging fried green tomato batter mix and secret sauce.
I have watched their self-esteem already raised to a new level. We know we need the healing time, but we also are ready to start saving because we've got to become economically independent.
And with the product showing up in local stores like Public Square Marketplace, RestStop is spreading their mission with every item sold.
We've actually had people who have traveled from other states who have visited us, who have found out about the ministry, who in turn have actually donated and given back to the ministry, or specifically buy the products in here because they know that 100% of those proceeds go right back into RestStop.
A team of women all in to help these trafficked women get back on their feet. In Wilson County, Claire Kopsky, News Channel 5.
It really was a gift of God, and because they have been on Shark Tank, their business is exploding. They're about to franchise, and we will be packing product for all of their franchisees. And the gal that spoke, Holly is the owner, and then the gal who said, I don't think people know how hard it is. She's a survivor herself, and she just was hired just this month as our first social enterprise manager. And so we really are so excited about what God is doing. And that beautiful farm that you saw, is the name of the property was Good Hope Farms when we got the property. And that's what we decided to use as our social enterprise branding, because God had named us RestStop Ministries. But we thought when we got this property, and some of you may know the story, but it was a Nazarene family where a horrific tragedy happened on that property. And God would have it that He would tell me, you're going to have that property, and it's not just to serve the women that I've called you specifically to serve, but in taking that property off their hands, in purchasing that property, you are basically rescuing the lives of another whole set of survivors who had nothing else to do. They needed to sell the farm to live, a mother and the 4 children that she was homeschooling, 4 sons at the time that this tragedy happened. And so I just want you to know, again, every step of the way, when God calls you, He equips you and He empowers you, and He is your Jehovah Jireh and your sustainer and your provider. And I know that because He's proven faithful over and over and over again. And so Good Hope Farms, we just said, that's what we're offering, a good hope, and His name is Jesus, and we're going to cultivate that, and we're going to be good hope farmers. And so we kept that name for our social enterprise, and it's going to be pretty cool. But in the next just few minutes that I have, I feel like I need to now kind of back up from some of the specific about RestStop and talk to you a little bit about the global issue of human trafficking and help you get your heads around this for a little bit, and it'll make some of this even come more alive to you. But here are some of the numbers, and we're going to kind of start, and you probably can't see that, but I'm going to tell it to you very clearly. We're going to kind of start globally and funnel down. But this is modern-day slavery. You thought slavery was abolished? No. Human trafficking is modern-day slavery. More slaves in the world than ever before in human history. 40.3 million people enslaved in the world. 1 in 4 of those victims are children. Child labor, child soldiers, child brides, prostituted children. And we need to make sure that we don't ever say child prostitute or teen prostitute. A child or a teen is not a prostitute. They are being prostituted by someone. And even changing our language can help us change our thinking sometimes. 24.9 million of those enslaved people actually fit the definition of human trafficking victims in the world, both labor trafficking and sex trafficking. We'll talk a little bit about that definition this afternoon. I'm going to get into some of the other nitty-gritty, but just to know that human trafficking is the second largest and the fastest growing criminal enterprise on the planet. It's second only to drug trafficking. It used to be third. There was drug trafficking and gun trafficking or arms dealing. It has now surpassed arms, but actually the 3 go hand in hand a lot of the time. But think about it. You can sell a drug once. You can sell a gun once. But if you own a human being, you can sell that person over and over and over and over again. And so it is a business of profit. $150 billion industry annually across the globe. Try to get your head around this. We think of household brands like Nike and Starbucks, and we think they are big business. You put those two together, and you don't even get $34 billion. $150 billion global industry. And unfortunately, it is a business of supply and demand. If there were no demand for these services, there would not need to be a supply. And so as the church, we have got to start understanding the demand side. How are we culpable? How have we been culpable to a culture that has so over-sexualized the world, the society that we live in, such that human bodies are bought and sold for sexual pleasure? We'll talk about the demand and some of the drivers a little bit later. Women and girls are disproportionately affected. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen to men and boys too, but it's kind of the 80-20 rule. About 20% of victims are men and boys. 80% are female. Most of the time, again, the perpetrators then are male. There are some female perpetrators, so I don't want you to think that. But when you go with the disproportionate effect, 99% of the victims in the commercial sex industry are women and girls, and 58% in other sectors. And so we need to talk about that sex trafficking is born out of a general gender inequality, a gender inequity, a power differential in some ways, and it is often, it's gender-based violence. And I'm going to say a couple of words about that, but let me work through a few of the points on this slide. There's a Chinese proverb that says, women hold up half the sky. And if you think about the statistics, the population statistics, really over half. Women hold up half the sky. But that's pretty interesting coming from a country who has systematically disposed of the girl child in preference of the boy child with China's one-child policy. And so some of these things, you're going to hear me talk today and later about this. We got to have a merger of our theology and our reality, or what we say is true and what we practice. But I do hope you would, if you haven't already read it, that you would read the book. It's several years old now, but Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Wooden, who were Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists, wrote the book Half the Sky, Turning the Oppression of Women into Opportunity Worldwide. And they tell many of the stories that had broken my heart to get God even to soften the soil before he called me. But they went out to do a different story. But everywhere they went around the globe, they kept running into the horrific oppression and exploitation of women and girls. And so then they shifted their whole focus. It is our era's most pervasive human rights violation, the oppression of women and girls, and particularly in the developing world. Things like honor killings and acid burnings and genital mutilation, and these things should sicken us. This includes sexual abuse. Not all sexual abuse is trafficking, but again, it is one of the precursors, and it goes hand in hand, but especially child sexual abuse. It's more pervasive than any of us ever dreamed or imagined. It's more pervasive than we want to believe. And I think we are beginning to get more of a wake-up call. We've been woken up a little bit by the Me Too movement, which then came into the church, and the Church Too movement. And what we've seen recently, even within the Southern Baptist Convention and the SBC Too movement, which was a very public display of sexual abuse that had been hidden away and covered up, and don't think it couldn't happen to us. I'm very proud of us as a denomination. We've had Nazarene safe for some time yet, but we've barely scratched the surface. We have barely scratched the surface. And we have to think about these things. We have to be able to talk about these things as a church. So I'll quickly tell you this story, the next slide, because after the Lord called me in 2011 in that Garden of Gethsemane as I'm doing my benchmarking of best practices around the world, and I'm trying to figure out exactly how we're supposed to do this. I was privileged to go in 2012. I was privileged to be a part of a steering committee from our denomination it was a Kenya gender-based violence project that our denomination did in conjunction with UNICEF and Jim Koppel of Servant Forge, and a lot of people came together because it's a place where this is rampant in these rural areas of Kenya. It's often drivers of Coke products. I call everything a Coke. I don't know what, but soft drinks that little girls are enticed by, something they don't ever get to have, a Fanta grape soda. And then that is used to lure them. And it's just horrific. But talk about resources, how blessed we are, which is why, again, Church of America needs to wake up. But in Kenya, there was only one gender-based violence resource center, and it was in Nairobi. So for that whole country, it's in Nairobi. We got to visit this hospital that had this gender-based violence recovery center. And while there, I'm holding hands with Margaret, the mother, and then the little feet that are in the hospital bed over here, her 6-year-old daughter, Grace. And they were both at this recovery center because Margaret, the mother, had been brutally gang raped and needed some reconstructive surgery and had to travel all the way from the northwest corner, the Turkana area of Kenya, to come to Nairobi. And she put her daughter in the care of an orphanage there, temporary care of an orphanage, only to return to find that her daughter had been horrifically abused while in the care of this orphanage, such that she needed reconstructive surgery, 6-year-old, and had to be brought back to Nairobi. And so we were there because Grace was in the hospital and her mother, Margaret, was with her. And Dr. Carla Sundberg happened to be on that trip, and now she's one of our generals. And I just think about all of our world areas, and we just have barely scratched the surface of learning all the evil that exists in all the world areas where we are through Nazarene Missions International, where we're serving. There's so much to do, as Christy said. The harvest is still so full, and the workers still so few. But we always want to have global partners too. So you'll see we have, even out in my booth, Osavinya, the bags that our Kenyan women make that support them. We support them by buying the bags, and then it also becomes a support for RestStop. But one of the things that I want to say, it's the next slide, and I'm going to preach here just a second because I am a preacher too. And this is one of the messages that I think is a message that our denomination possesses, and it is something we need to be proclaiming and shouting from the mountaintops right now. So I want to highlight it because our Wesleyan holiness theology, we have always affirmed women. Since 1901, we've ordained women. Granted, our practice has not always kept up with our theology and our polity, but I teach the Foundations of Women's Ordination class for our district, and when we're talking about it, we will use Joseph Colson's book. An NTS professor will use his pamphlet, where he so beautifully gives the biblical understanding of this phrase, Ezer Kenegdo. It comes from the creation story in Genesis 1 and 2, when God says, I will make a helper suitable for him, and that unfortunate translation of helper has been so abused and misused and misunderstood all along, because that word helper is Ezer. strong helper. And every other place in the Bible where that word is used, it's talking about God. God as the Azer, God as the strong helper. Where does my help come from? It comes from God, the maker of heaven and earth. It's God as a strong helper, an Azer. And then the next phrase is there also in the Hebrew, in that Genesis 1 and 2 understanding. I will make an Azer kenegdo, a strong power like him. Remember that they're looking for a suitable helper for Adam, a strong power like him, facing him as equal. That's what it means in the original language. We are a holy alliance. We are a partnership, male and female, working together in the home and in the church. And we need to be shouting that from the rooftops, because what a time to be Wesleyan. What a time to be a Wesleyan holiness denomination when all this other has happened, where women are being so subjected to such, I don't even know the words for it, but we should be so proud of our heritage and preach this biblically. Women, girls need this message today, and I hope that you will be preaching this message. I've got just 2 or 3 more slides. I have 5 minutes till my time is over, and we'll pick this back up this afternoon. But I want to quickly just talk to you about the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. The Tvpa of 2000, the year 2000, is where we now have a legal basis for these severe forms of trafficking in persons. And sex trafficking is when a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. For adult victims, you have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. And it's really not very hard to prove. I mean, there are a lot of ways force, fraud in particular, and coercion happen. But if the victim is under 18 years of age, if commercial sex act, if that has been exchanged, it's immediately trafficking. No questions asked. Nothing else has to be proven. And it's not just the exchange of money. Anything of value that is exchanged for sex. And you think about survival sex that's out there on the streets for runaways, or think about, it breaks your heart, but mama can't pay the rent this month, but she can send her daughter over to see the landlord. That's trafficking. That's trafficking. That's anything of value exchanged. It's happening all around us. Nationally, let me give you some numbers. This should shake you to your core. Every 2 minutes in the United States of America, not around the world, every 2 minutes in our country, a child is trafficked. 300,000 children at risk annually for trafficking into the sex industry. And this crosses all barriers, all socioeconomic barriers, we have served women. We have served now 48 women. We're about to intake number 49 and number 50. And you may think, well, that's not a lot for 6.5 years. They can live with us for 2 full years when we have 8 beds. But we are about to serve our 50th survivor. And wow, the stories are as unique as they are human beings. And it comes from everywhere, it crosses all the boundaries you might think about. But the average age of entry is 12 to 14 years of age. That's entry into actual prostitution. The grooming and abuse that happens, and many times the trafficking, way earlier. I mentioned the little girl who was just 5, and we see that all the time. Runaways will be exploited within 48 hours. You need to know that. These traffickers are shrewd. They know their game. They know where to go and find vulnerable people. And within 48 hours, they will be approached. The folks at the border where the Ukrainian immigrants, refugees were being taken, though our folks who were on the ground on the borders there said, before any of the good guys show up, the traffickers are there. Traffickers are there first. They're there first. 90% of runaways end up in the sex trade. Minors are sold 10 to 15 times per day, 6 days a week, many of them 7. There's really no day off. There's really no time off. 83% of sex trafficking victims are U.S. citizens. We think, even in our country, when we at first didn't think it was an issue here, we just thought, oh, it's over there in Thailand or Cambodia or the places that are known for sex tourism around the globe. When we began to learn, no, it's a domestic issue, we still had in mind it's the foreign nationals. No, these are our own kids. I'm going to tell you the stories this afternoon. These are our own kids. In Tennessee, and you can go and find the numbers for your state, but in Tennessee, just during a 24-month study period, 100% of counties in Tennessee report cases of trafficking. You must know that many of these go unreported, however. But in 24 months, 4 counties had reported over 100 cases. And you heard on our news clip, 94 to 100 trafficked every month in the state of Tennessee, minors. Of course, Nashville's a tourism destination city, and every time you have tourism, you're going to have sex tourism. Our proximity to Atlanta, just 4 hours north, and it's the busiest international airport in the country. Our I-40, 65, 24 corridor that goes through makes for easy transport. But there doesn't have to be any transportation that happens here. Many of the victims we serve never left their own home. Families are trafficking their own children in the privacy of their own home. Last slide for the morning session. Last slide. We have to understand the drivers. Pornography is definitely a driver for trafficking. It's now more properly being called CSAM, child sexual abuse material. That's what it is. Unfortunately, the appetite is getting younger and younger, and so child pornography is the biggest seller and the biggest issue. And so here, the organization Thorn, said this: while child pornography is a global issue, the United States remains the largest both producer and consumer of child pornography, child abuse content in the world. Folks, we got to get our heads out of the sand. We have to wake up. The church has to be a voice, and we have to get messy and get our hands dirty and get in this business, because it is the church's business. This is the church's business. There are people hiding, this and I'm done, hiding on the back side of the cross. I recommend this book to you. This is fresh, new from our theologians at NNU, Diane LeClaire and Brent Peterson. And it's called An Atonement Theology for the Abused and Abandoned. And the basic premise is, evangelicals are getting a bad rap these days, and not all for good reasons, but we do need to hear this in our efforts to evangelize. There are some people who the first thing, they cannot hear you're a sinner in need of forgiveness and grace. What they need to hear is, you have been so sinned against. That first you have to know the cross of Jesus Christ was for your healing, your full redemption, your ability to be whole. It is wholeness. It is holiness. That is the work of the cross that so many need to hear first and foremost, and we have to lead with that. And only then can they come to a place of the other side of the cross. We're going to have to move people from hiding behind the back side of the cross to then get them to the front side of the cross. And not just for those who have been abused and sinned against, but I'm just going to tell you this about pornography. We also have to get our heads out of the sand. The statistics on pornography addiction are not much different inside the church than out. And it has been such a shame-based addiction. And it is an addiction. It is something that at some point, it then takes over the brain and changes the brain chemistry. And it's not just about saying, you need to quit that. And we as a church are going to have to make it a safe space to take the shame away so that confession can happen and help can be sought and we can talk about these things in order to find the healing. We're broken as well as the world being broken. And we need to wake up and understand that and do something about it. And so I pray that everything that God is going to do in the rest of this day is just going to continue to stir our hearts that we got some revelation that we need. I mean, revival is a two-part thing. There's some dismantling that has to happen and then some remantling. And if we're going to see revival, we got to dismantle and remantle. And I pray that that's what we're about today. Thank you for your kind attention. I'm 4 minutes.